My name's Sunil Aggarwal. I'm a final year medical student at the University of Washington. I'm a PhD researcher in cannabis, cannabinoid medicines, and through the context of social science and geography, actually. From the perspective of patients, they should know that the American Medical Association is the largest group of doctors in the United States. And it's the oldest group of doctors. I think maybe about 20% or a little less of doctors in America belong to this organization. And so they write policy. They advise Congress and the government on what ways they think things should go, and they do reviews of issues. And one issue that they have been writing about and talking about for at least a couple decades is the question about cannabis, or marijuana. The term in law right now is marijuana, but cannabis is a scientific name. To what extent does it have medically useful properties, and how can we best proceed with the evidence that we have as far as policy? So for a long time, going back to the 30s, the AMA initially had come out strongly against the idea of removing cannabis from ready access for doctors and patients. But the government had other agendas, and of course they got expert witnesses to come and testify that marijuana was caused dogs to go insane and changed their personality structure and led to social breakdown, mixing of races, this kind of thing. The AMA was the only voice back in those days that said, you guys have no scientific basis to make these claims, and there is a medical history of the use of this product, and we know that it's useful for things like psychotherapy to help people remember forgotten memories. That was actually a testimony that the AMA gave to Congress that was helpful to remember lost memories. And they said that there was plenty of other future therapeutic uses that we would want to develop, but we couldn't with this new restriction. So they were overruled. Actually, their testimony was falsified on the floor of Congress. When one congressman asked what was the AMA's position, they said that the AMA supported the prohibition, the Marijuana Tax Act, which was false. So fast forward, eventually they lost that battle. The government did stop all kinds of research from being publicized about the non-toxic and less harmful effects of marijuana than the government was claiming that came out in the 40s. They blocked that as well. So eventually the doctors, organized medicine, said, okay, we're not going to push this envelope anymore, and we got other things, we have other medicines, and so it goes. So fast forward to the 90s, after, actually in the 70s, they said that we support the Nixon Commission idea that there should be a minimal amount of criminal penalties for personal use of marijuana. I think they may have even said the removal of them. It was a very conservative position, but was in line with other major organizations like the Bar Association and other major groups. Eventually, that issue didn't go anywhere after Nixon trashed the Commission's report's recommendation on the changing of marijuana in law. So they left it alone for another 20 years until California passed its medical cannabis law in 1996. And they decided a few years after that they have to make a statement now about this. And they said that, yes, physicians should feel free to discuss whatever treatment they want with their patients, and that it should not subject either party to a criminal sanction. But and that was just being said in the context of the medical recommendations for marijuana or for cannabis that are the basis of the state medical cannabis laws. So they supported that. But in the same breath, they said, but we just don't think that really, in terms of drug regulatory policy, that it should be removed from Schedule I, that it should be retained in Schedule I, marijuana, which is the most restrictive category of drugs, and which prohibits general prescription of marijuana. And so they just said, okay, you can talk about it, but if you really want to do prescriptions and have an actually medical product, we are against that idea because there's no adequate and well-controlled studies. So now that is the position until till last year, basically. So last year, they finally, after a year study on the issue, after resolutions that were brought to the body from the student section of the AMA, the medical student section of which I'm a member of, and I actually was a delegate too from my medical school. I brought a resolution to them with other co-sponsoring students saying, hey, we have a lot of evidence that's been gathered now in scientific literature, all these controlled clinical studies showing cannabis to be effective in pain and spasticity and spasms and nausea and vomiting, et cetera, et cetera. This idea that it has no currently accepted medical use and no safety for use under medical supervision, which is the Schedule I requirements, is not a scientifically tenable position to take, and the AMA should recognize that. We have to update our policy. So we said that the government, the AMA should urge the government to reclassify marijuana to a more appropriate schedule. And the AMA took that policy under consideration for a year. That policy was brought to them by the student section and the Washington State Medical Society. Both organizations brought the policy to them. And then there was a big meeting in November of '08, and they said, okay, a lot of people testified and gave evidence to the board, and they said, okay, well, we'll send it to our body to study it for a year, our Council on Science and Public Health, which is our best body to look at scientific evidence. So they spent a year reviewing the science and the evidence base. I'm happy to say that I was consulted in that process. I was allowed to be an expert reviewer on this report, and I fed them all the evidence and data that I'd gathered in my studies and other studies I'd read. And eventually they wrote a report. I can't remember how many pages, but it's nice. It's a nice report. And in the report, they describe the history of how the government once claimed that marijuana led to homicidal mania, and how that was a preposterous claim, clearly. But it's the fact that the government said it is worth mentioning in the report. And they also said that the evidence showed that smoked cannabis could relieve neuropathic pain, spasticity, and certain forms of wasting disorders, in clear plain language. That's in the report. And at the end of the report, they said, here's what we recommend the AMA policy to be. They recommend that the AMA urge the government to review the Schedule I status of marijuana. And they said that they wanted this to help develop the field of cannabinoid-based medicines, which is really kind of the cannabinoids type medicines come from cannabis, which has phytocannabinoids, and it comes from other places too, because you can do chemistry and make other types of cannabinoids. But the whole basis of cannabinoid-based medicines is from the idea of a botanical cannabis. So it's saying, let's move the cannabinoid science forward. Let's get marijuana, it's really suspect that it's in Schedule I. We need to move it out of there so we can have more access. I think that's the idea. In another schedule, there's far more access for medical prescription in treatment trials and for larger studies to be done. So all of that was adopted by the AMA in 2009. November 10th, I believe, was the date, or 9th, I think it was. There was a big debate on their House floor, and it passed. So now we have a new position for that organization, which is that the largest physicians organization is urging the government to review marijuana status as a Schedule I drug. And that's actually in line with the second largest physicians organization, which is the American College of Physicians. They've been around since the early 1900s. And they've also said that we urge the government to review the Schedule I status of marijuana. And in their report, they say that we think reclassification is the way to go, and that it would improve public support for the drug approval process, and it would be scientifically valid, and on and on. So they have reports, and then they have official statements. So the official statement of the AMA and the report are currently in process. The official report is supposed to be published in a journal, a medical peer-reviewed journal. So far, they've kept the report kind of, only a few people can see it, and maybe send it to a few journalists, but they're waiting to publish it in a journal. And last I heard, it was going to go in a pretty big major journal, medical journal. We'll see. It's still under review, or it's coming up. It should be happening very soon. It's in process. Number two, the official policy is supposed to be told to their official partners in the government, the federal government, Department of Health and Human Services, the Federal Food and Drug Administration, the Drug Enforcement Administration, the Office of National Drug Control Policy. All of these organizations are groups that the AMA has worked with over the years, and they have to send an official letter to their official people there, letting them know this is the new policy coming out of our November 2009 meeting. Last I heard, that letter was yet to be sent, and it was going to be sent very, very soon, because they had a deadline to send all their materials from that 2009 meeting within a few months, and I think that's already happened. or it should be happening any time now. So that's what I've heard from the council president, the group, that council, the staffer of that council. That's what he's told me. So that's where we are right now with the AMA's progress. As I mentioned at the conference earlier, it's kind of like the writing's on the wall. The two largest physicians groups in the country are saying that the Schedule I position of marijuana is suspect and urgently needs reconsideration. I mean, they're all pointing downward from this most restrictive category, and I don't know how long a government can maintain a legitimate position of a drug, calling it no currently accepted medical use, when the currently accepted medical opinion is that the Schedule I status isn't an accepted position for the drug. So I think it's just a matter of time for those two currents to meet. So I think that's going to be very favorable for the responsible regulation of cannabis in federal law.